today talking with Jennifer Pikoos, who is the practice director for TurningPoint Human Resources. And we're talking about a lot of the different HR initiatives that are out there in the marketplace. Some things that have been taking hold, post-COVID, or at least somewhat post-COVID. Some trends that were really kind of in place even pre-COVID in 2018 and 2019 that really accelerated over the last, several years. So Jennifer, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about, how things have changed in terms of the way that we all work and lead, not just from an HR perspective, but in general. How do we operate with so many different, demographics and populations within the workforce, and so many new forces coming through as a result of COVID?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and talk through some of these things. They are all, particularly this subject, very front and center in the way, I'm going to say in the way that we work and the way that we lead right now, because of multiple factors, as you've just pointed out. So a few things. So obviously, we all know that we have just gone through a pandemic. I don't think it's officially over yet, but we're certainly seeing trends sort of going back to some things in the way it was before the pandemic. So we can identify these 3 years of going through the pandemic as unique. When we had to, on a dime, leave the office, particularly for organizations that didn't necessarily have an extensive remote workforce, the HR leader and team, but really all of the leaders of the organization had to figure out almost overnight how to change the way that they lead, how to change the way that they work, the way that they expect their employees to work. All of that had to change quickly. And there was this expectation, I'm sure for many of us in the organizations we were in at the time, that almost had an expectation that we were going to have that figured out almost instantaneously, even though this was so new to so many people. And so I think there was a significant onus on the HR leaders of organization, the HR teams, to figure that out. I was a part of a lot of different networking opportunities, virtual, of course, to talk about these types of things. How should we do this? How should we manage? And that ranged anywhere from operational to very strategic and very personal. And so what the pandemic sort of forced upon all of us, no matter where we were in the world, really, that's what was so interesting about this, is that we had to figure out how to stay connected with the organization, whether you were an individual contributor and just needed to do your job each day, or you were a manager, or you were a leader in an organization running an entire team. How do you do that? So having to figure that out was a huge challenge. It was a very exciting challenge for I think people like me who love to learn and figure out how to get over obstacles and challenges. But we had to create an opportunity for connection. Communication became the number one thing, that people were talking about. How do you communicate with each other? I remember we set up, weekly team Zoom calls and ways in which we could figure out how to bring teams together. But this new responsibility, which has now lasted and has continued with a lot of organizations becoming much more flexible physically in how they work, having some remote workers, having some people in the office. The managers had to figure out a way to keep their teams together, to keep the camaraderie alive, to keep people engaged, even happy. People were feeling very isolated. I remember, going through a lot of those conversations with people. And so that has continued. And there is a responsibility that I think leaders of an organization, managers now have that they didn't have before, which was this whole added layer of how to stay connected and how not to sort of discriminate towards people who are coming into the office, because you're seeing them face to face a lot more than you might be seeing somebody face to face who's working remotely. And so leaders might have a tendency to offer more opportunities to people they're seeing in the office each day. So they have to be very careful about that and very thoughtful about creating equal opportunities for people in and out of the office for work. But then also, I think, there is a similar type of accountability on the side of the person who's working remotely, whether they're sort of allowed to voluntarily in a flexible work arrangement. They're required to work remotely. Some people, some companies sold their entire office and moved everybody remote permanently. And those people have to figure out ways to get themselves in front and center with their teams, with their managers as well, So, I think if somebody working remotely has an expectation that their manager is going to always make sure to include them, to see them, then that might not be the best assumption to make. And they really need to focus on ways in which they can really try to connect more with their managers, with their team members, whether that's just getting regular meetings on the calendar, whether that is showing up to the office just a little bit more, perhaps to be seen, or volunteering to put themselves on different projects and things that they become more visible to people throughout the organization. So now what we're seeing is we have this convergence of lots of different generations of people coming into the workforce, newer generations coming in with very different expectations of how we work. Some people who have come out of college and organizations have hired straight from school never knew work without the pandemic, without this remote or flexible type of work that's being offered. And they have very different expectations of what an HR leader is going to do to onboard somebody, what they're going to do to train them, what kind of expectations are they going to set for the first 90 days or 6 months, and do those change because somebody was hired in as a remote worker versus somebody in the office. So there are so many more things, for leaders to be figuring out. I think strong HR leaders can really provide a lot of support, having taken companies through this for the last 3+ years. They have figured out ways to make this successful, and I think can offer a lot of opportunity to business leaders throughout an organization on how to be successful here.
And one of the ways that I think a lot of people are trying to kind of figure out the best way to show up also and to stay connected and feel connected is showing up as a whole person, right? Actually, and this is a trend that we started to see even pre-pandemic, right? Where, you're no longer just a number on a spreadsheet. You're really a whole person. And people, wanted to know what was going on with you, aside from the idle Monday morning chit chat, what did you do all weekend,
How was
right?
your weekend?
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you look at, big issues that have happened out there across a lot of, very large Fortune 100 companies, in terms of social issues and everything that happened with George Floyd, right? And everything that's happening in different states around the country with different issues out there, regardless of what side you're on, you as a leader have to figure out how to engage a wide variety of opinions and kind of the whole social consciousness around your employee base. So I'm curious if you see a different methodology or approach or mindset coming in to organizations and leaders working with their employees with that in mind, that they do have to show up and they're expected to show up as a human being, not just a worker bee.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of information that can be talked about in this particular subject. The convergence or the overlap, however you want to look at it, of somebody's personal life and professional life, may have been something that some leaders, were very good at asking about and getting to know employees. Some employees feel very comfortable sharing personal information and some don't, right? But before the pandemic, you could keep that very separated. I used to even say I had a long commute for many, many years of my career. And I used to say that I really enjoyed that because it got me out of my leader job, out of my work family and back into the mindset of my family, my children, my husband. And so there was this really clear line of separation, even if you're working, more than a typical 8-hour day or whatnot. But during the pandemic, we were all here in our homes, still, and that separation almost vanished, overnight. Many people have their computers up and running all the time. They're not shutting them down anymore. People are hearing, the kids running around, the pets running around. There's just a lot of chaos that might be going on, or there might be a lot of isolation that's being felt. And so now I think, leaders almost have this, I don't know if obligation is maybe a little bit too strong of a word, but it really behooves leaders of an organization, in my opinion, to recognize that people are whole people and they have this life of what they do at work and what they offer, but then they also have this life with their families, whatever that might be. And you can't ignore that anymore because it's front and center when you're talking with somebody over Zoom or Teams or whatever platform you're using. You see people walking in the background. So it's just unavoidable. And I think the best way to make people feel truly connected to their organization is to recognize that about them. And so don't just ask them on a Monday morning how their weekend was, learn about them to the extent they're comfortable sharing. Ask them about their child that just went to college, or their child that just started first grade, or anything. There's just so much that can be talked about, and then follow up on those things. Make sure that these people, the people that you're working around, understand that you actually care about what's going on. Excuse me, about what's going on in their life. And you're going to take the time, even if that means there's going to be time that's taken away from talking about the business thing that needs to be talked about, because you're doing that. It will pay off in spades to make people feel like there is just this greater level of connection. I think right now, a lot of leaders are hearing about the fact that having empathy and sympathy and creating that connection and being kind and just good, have really become the top priorities for leaders to be successful in an organization, for leaders to maintain and retain strong employees of an organization and make them feel like they want to stay longer than 1 year or 2 years. We're obviously seeing a lot of that now. Has become very normal for people to move from job to job in their career journey after a couple years. And those of us that maybe started our careers a long time ago, like me, might not be used to that. Our parents, my father worked for the same organization for his entire career, from from college to retirement, and that was a little more normal then. Now that's just unheard of, but that's okay. That's what leaders need to expect. So